Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and a little review of another Fengda airbrush. Yes, I know, I've done it again. I've been out and bought another Fengda. This one is the FE-183K and can be had off Amazon for the mighty price of £25.99. Now, I know we looked at a Fengda before, but that was a different one. And I have a different reason for having picked this one up, and so I thought I'd share it with you. Let's have a look. First of all, what do you get in the box for your £25.99? Well, in the cardboard box is a plastic box, a lovely little plastic case. Actually, it's not that small, is it? A little bit of information on the front there. Get rid of that, don't need that anymore. What do we get in here? Well, first off, a braided airline, and this is a braided airline with the correct ends. The majority of the better hobby compressors out there will come with this size, so that will screw directly straight on. If you have the type of compressor which has a smaller end, you've got that. So it's essentially a double ender with the airbrush size at each end, but it already has the adapter to fit most compressors. Okay, put that down there. I actually do need a new hose, so that's cool. The brush itself then is quite different from the last one. So the last one was effectively, shall we say, a copy of like your standard conventional sort of a water style brush. This one is not. It is slightly different. I'll get all the parts out. Clearly, as you can see, you get three different size colour cuts. There's a little wee one, a really big one, and a perfect porridge one. We'll just take the perfect one out for now. Paperwork wise, in the bottom there, what have we got? Operation: connect air supply, add medium into the reservoir after thinning to the desired consistency. Okay, it's pretty basic info. Little diagram on the back showing the construction. No part numbers on here, but we do have part names, and then an importer little thing. Airgueurope.com in the Netherlands. So obviously who's bringing them in. There's nothing too fancy in there, so let's get rid of that. So this brush then comes with three setups, as I hope you're gathering from what you can see here. So we get a 0.3 setup, a 0.5 setup, which is what it's fitted with, and a 0.8mm setup. Now 0.8 is pretty big for an airbrush, and it's not a size that you're going to come across very often, and that's actually why I've picked this up, because I wanted something that had a bit more capacity for heavier bodied paints and larger jobs, basically. So that's why I went for this one. The cups literally just screw into place in the top here eventually, if I can get it right. There we go. That's that fitted. I'm going to take it off again anyway, because the first thing I'm going to do is strip it down. The reason for that is that feels like operating a tractor, so I'm going to take it apart. This gives us a chance to look at the way it goes together, and I'm going to put it back together again with the aid of a little light lubrication. And then I'll give it a test spray and see what I think. Lubrication wise, I've just sprayed a little bit of WD-40 into that there. And I have my water super lube as well. So first things first, we'll take the back off. And then the needle's not tight. We'll take it out. Oh man. And the majority of the nasty feeling is coming from this trigger assembly, so I think this is where the lube is going to be required. That happens every single damn time. And I say that every time as well. Quite fine thread on there. And a lot of times with these cheap brushes, they tend to have quite coarse threads on them. Trigger out. Up front then, you've got a 2-stage air cap, just like you do on an Iwata. Front piece, which you can spray without that fitted for closer work should you desire. And the actual nozzle itself. And then you're left with this much larger piece. Now this differs from the other brushes I have, and indeed the other Fengda, in the way the actual nozzle is mounted. So you've got this nice big piece with an equally, it's a pretty comical spanner actually for fitting it. And when you take that off, the actual nozzle falls out. So the nozzle isn't threaded into the body, it's floating and it's tapered. So the idea being that it sits in the body thus, and it'll self-center, whoops, it'll self-center with that taper as you tighten the cap down onto it, and then the cap will hold it in place. Nice and easy then for people who are blessed with fumble fingers, which I seem to be today, or people who just don't like threading things in. Downside, the necessity for quite precise machining and engineering, but I don't think that's going to be an issue. So there you go. So to change the setup, you simply select the setup you want, take the relevant parts out and fit them onto the brush. So the needle, the nozzle and the air cap. The needles are all the same size along the majority of their length. I'll use the big one to show you what I'm talking about. So the main body of the needle is exactly the same width, diameter, but when you look at the tips, this is the 0.5, this is the 0.8, you can see that's much heftier at the end. The 0.3 is finer again, and that's why it's got this little sleeve on it inside the protective housing, just to stop it from getting bent, which is quite easily done. Alright then, let's get this thing lubed up and working nicely. The air valve assembly itself is held in the same way as Iwata's, with that little 2 slots in there which you just fit an appropriate tool and turn it, and out it comes. An appropriate tool is of course a pair of fine modelling tweezers, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Spring and the actual plunger. It's virtually identical to my Iwata brushes. So this is a sort of a mixture, if you like, of styles, because the floating nozzle is something that the Harder and Steinbeck airbrushes feature. The Infinity, is it? But it's quite a nice feature, as I say, for anybody who's got advancing eyesight. Yeah, me. And people, as I say, with fumble finger disease. It's really nice to not have to mess around trying to thread a tiny nozzle into a tiny thread, all the while knowing that it's oh so easy to strip it and ruin it and just destroy your extremely expensive investment. Just make sure that still works. Yes, it does. Okay, right then. I'm going to use WD-40 mostly to lube it up, and the reason for that is this stuff's great, but over time, if you don't use your airbrush much, and this one isn't going to get used every day, it sort of goes sticky and almost solidifies inside, and I don't like it. So I'm going to use WD-40. Don't need to worry about using WD-40 on your airbrush. It's not going to attack these O-rings, far from it. Nor will it bother your paints, because it doesn't feature silicone in its makeup and never has, as it says on the adverts. So don't worry about using WD-40, it is fine. Put that back in there. With some difficulty. There we go. So that's in there. I suspect most of the roughness came from that piece on the front there. That has now been dipped in WD, and likewise using a cotton bud soaked in it just to apply it to those threads, and just makes everything thread together more smoothly. Just feels better. Oh yeah, much better. Alright, so that's that back in. I'll carefully put the needle back through, but not all the way. I'll just get it into position. In common with the other Fengda, this needle is quite, relatively speaking, quite roughly finished. So I suspect it will be quite happy to get stuck regularly if you're not careful with it. Okay, so that's in, but I'll pull that back so it's not protruding and I can't accidentally damage it. Pop the stopper back on. And then I'll add the nozzle back into the front here. Just pop that in there on its taper, and this thread is now lubricated, and I'll just pop that on there. And just go slowly when you're threading this back in to give that nozzle a chance to self-center. Put it down to the stop by hand and then just nip it up. Don't need to be stupidly tight, but it wants to be seated properly. Now that's in, I can pop the needle through till you feel the stop. Once you feel the stop, don't be tempted to sit there and spin it and smash it ever harder into it. So all you're going to do is prematurely wear that nozzle. I think the packing's probably a touch tight on that, to be fair. Woo! Last but not least, I'll pop the front end on. It is remarkable how a little smear of WD makes the threads feel so much better. I think something like the old-fashioned 3-in-1 oil is probably ideal, slightly heavier bodied than WD-40 but not so thick that it's going to cause problems with anything. So the back end is the usual now, absolutely the norm, adjustable. So the idea with this is you turn this knob here in, you see the trigger getting pushed forward. So it adjusts the maximum travel of the needle. So if you wanted to do fine work and you don't trust yourself, you can set a backstop here that stops you from pulling the trick back too far. I prefer to utilise my own skill and judgment for that, to be honest. Okay, so there's my colour cup on, and I have to fit an adapter for a quick release coupling. Thus, in fact, yes, I'll use this in the airline anyway. So this brush doesn't feature a MAC valve. What's a MAC valve? This is a MAC valve. This is my Custom Micron Plus. The MAC valve adjusts the amount of air that comes through. So the maximum air comes in here, but then it goes via this valve, and you can finally adjust how much air you're actually using at the tip using this rather than mucking about with a compressor. So there's no MAC valve on this. That doesn't need to be a disaster though, because nowadays you can buy inline MAC valves that fit to your actual airline, which is what this is. Exactly the same deal. You turn this and it just adjusts the air pressure that the brush is actually getting. So you can set your compressor to 2.5 bar or something and just leave it and use the inline MAC valve to adjust, so you don't need to spend extra on your airbrush basically. Let's get the compressor on. chuck a bit of IPA in there, and I'm just going to spray that straight through. You can't see it because I'm not going to spray it over my bench, but there's a nice steady flow that's coming out, and it's chucking a fair bit of paint out at a fair rate. So to test it with paint then, I'm going to use this. This is MRP Russian Cockpit Turquoise. I've picked it for the simple reason that it's a known quantity. This is a brand new jar, as you can see. It's never been used or opened. I'll get it mixed up now. Point being though, that it's a known quantity, it's repeatable. So if I use this and show you how it behaves, then you know that if you use this, you should get the same results were you to buy this airbrush. I do have a ball in for shaking, but because this hasn't been used and it's all settled, I'm going to stir it up with a stirrer anyway, just to get that stuff in the bottom mixed in a bit more quickly. And as I say, I won't thin it or anything, I'll use it as it comes and we'll just see what it looks like. So that's pretty much mixed, not absolutely perfect, but it's good enough for what we need. And I'm just going to pop a bit of this straight in. Can't see what I'm doing. I need a lot. Put the lid on. Always use a lid, kids. I know you don't have to, and I know if you're spraying with very small amounts it might seem ridiculous, but I have tipped the contents of my airbrush over a model far too many times now to not use that piece of advice. Okay, so this is a mule wing. This is a 1/32 scale Messerschmitt 109 wing panel, spare, surplus to requirements. Give that a clean with a little bit of IPA because it's been kicking about on the side of the bench forever. And I don't want any dirtiness of the part to influence what I'm doing. And for the same reason, I'm also going to give it a quick wipe over with Mr. Colour Thinner, just to make sure there's nothing on there that's going to influence things. Sweet. Compressor on. Alright, let's see how this sprays. First off, I'm just literally going to spray and see what happens. So this is the 0.5mm needle setup, as you recall, and as you can probably see, it sprays quite finely actually. Doesn't it? What a god awful colour. I really should have picked something a bit prettier, shouldn't I? So what I can tell you there then straight off, it doesn't have the instinctive feeling of control that my Water Revolution does. The trigger, pulling it back ever so slightly whilst in the middle of the job there to try and get the paint flow just nicely, just right, felt a bit stiff and unwilling to cooperate, so I've just loosened that spring a little. But no, it's really very notchy inside. I think I'll polish the needle. I think that will help with that. Doesn't overly matter because that's not why I bought this brush. I bought it for doing larger jobs, so it's not a concern. But say that this is a 0.5mm brush needle setup. It's spraying really quite finely. Let's try it on some grey. Might felt a bit nicer. Not really. Okay. Squiggles. Signed it. Yeah, that's already bedding in actually. I'll take back some of that critique. As you can see here, with really very little effort and no real setup, I've taken this out of the box. You've watched this in real time. That is spraying really nicely. As I say, it's a known quantity. Just if you don't have any MRP, then maybe buy a bottle just so you can see the consistency of it, to see, you know, how to replicate this, because it's all well and good for people to say thin to the consistency of milk, or add X percentage of thinners, but every colour is different, honestly, and it's more useful to get a feel for what a certain consistency actually looks like in the colour cup and in the jar. And Mr. Paint is a pretty good starting point, and for the majority of the time you're not going to need it to be any thinner than this. So maybe if you are struggling with that aspect of things and you don't have a helpful club member close by that you can go and tap up for info, then that might be a good starting place. And yes, that agricultural initial feeling is bedding in nicely already. So as I say, maybe with a little bit of a needle polish and just a bit more use, it will settle in quite well. But overall, you can't argue with that finish. That's spot on. And the finesse is certainly there if you're gonna work at it and get used to the brush. So I have to say, and it won't be a surprise because we're starting to see these more and more often, aren't we? This is a nice brush. For £25.99, it's an awesome brush. Absolutely ridiculous. Now, I can't speak for the longevity of this because the last Fengda I bought, I gave away on the channel, so I never used it more than a couple of times. But I have modelling friends who are using them day in, day out. Jonathan Mott from the Interesting Modelling Company uses his regularly and hasn't reported any issues, and other friends of mine that use them haven't reported any issues. Parts backup isn't an issue, actually. I thought it might be, but Google it. There's a Fengda website. You can get every part possible for these things. So, and the parts prices are cheap too. By way of comparison, my Revolution, my daily driver, granted this thing's easily 15 years old now, but I had to replace the nozzle very recently. It was worn out, and I thought I'll get a needle at the same time. The price of those two parts alone for this brush was more than this entire airbrush. It cost me £35 for reference for a nozzle and a needle for this brush. For the custom micron, those same parts are going to cost about 70 quid. So I start to think it's probably more cost effective to buy a Fengda and change the whole damn thing when it wears out. I don't know. But yeah, what a bargain. Absolutely brilliant bit of kit for the money. No arguments. So I hope that was useful. I will leave a link, an Amazon link for this kit in the description. Full disclosure, if any of you choose to follow that link and purchase yourselves an FE-183K, or indeed any other airbrush or morsel from Amazon, haven't clicked that link, I will receive a small amount of money. It won't cost you any more, but I will receive a small amount of money from Amazon if you do that. But yeah, anybody who doesn't have a decent airbrush yet and is still stuck out there wondering what to get, look no further. This thing's got 3 needle setups that cover everything you could possibly want to do. It's got the different cup sizes, so if you're doing a big job like I do have a 48th scale SR71 to build, this here it is, it'll do everything you need it to do. So with that said, it just remains for me to say, look after yourselves, look after each other, try a Fengda, and Genesis out.